বিসমিল্লাহির রহমানির রহিম। আবার চলে আসলাম 46তম বিসিএস লিখিত ইবিসি ইঞ্জিনিয়ার্স বিসিএস ডায়েরি স্পেশাল ব্যাচ 77 এর এক্সাম, যেটা এক্সাম 3 এর এসে রচনার পার্ট ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ এন্ড ইটস ইম্প্যাক্ট। তো আমরা হচ্ছে এই এসেটা দেখব। এটা হচ্ছে ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ এন্ড ইটস ইম্প্যাক্টস অন বাংলাদেশ, প্রায় 15 পেজের। রাইট অ্যান এসে ইন অ্যাবাউট 1000 words on the following topic, 50 mark. Climate change and its impact on Bangladesh, or global warming in Bangladesh. The climate emergency is a race we are losing, but it is a race we can win. Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General. Climate change is the defining crisis of our time, and it is happening even more quickly than we feared. No corner of the globe is immune from the devastating consequences of climate change. Bangladesh is recognized worldwide as one of the most vulnerable countries in terms of impact of climate change. Addressing the climate change risk, the government of Bangladesh has taken several initiatives to ensure a better preparedness for the current and future generations of Bangladeshis to reverse the perilous impacts of climate change. Greenhouse effect, global warming and climate change. According to Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC), climate change refers to a change in the state of climate that can be identified by changes in the mean or the variability of its properties and that persists for an extended period, typically decades or longer. On the other hand, NASA has defined global warming as the unusually rapid increase in Earth's average surface temperature over the past century, primarily due to the greenhouse gases released by people burning fossil fuels. Gases that contribute most of the Earth's greenhouse effects are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, ozone, water vapor. So, causes of climate change. The two main causes of climate change are human and natural causes of climate change. So, natural causes: sunspot and solar cycle, ocean tide and current, forest fire, volcanic eruptions, meteorite, methane emission from animals. Anthropogenic causes, meaning man-made or human causes: chemical fertilizer, deforestation, increased motor vehicles, emission of GHG, unplanned urbanization, industrialization, emission of carbon dioxide. Natural causes of climate change: 1. Solar variation, solar cycle, sunspot. 2. Volcanic eruptions, gases, magma, lava. 3. Axial tilt, Earth's angle 23.5 degree. 4. Precession, spinning top. 5. Eccentricity, orbital path variation. 6. Continental drift, plate tectonic. 7. Ocean current, evaporation. 8. Natural forest fire, carbon dioxide, methane and ashes. Greenhouse gases, natural greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. Anthropogenic causes, the overall effect of human activities since the industrial revolution has been a warming effect driven primarily by emissions of carbon dioxide and enhanced by emissions of other greenhouse gases. The buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has led to an enhancement of the natural greenhouse effect. It is this human-induced enhancement of the greenhouse effect that is of concern, because ongoing emissions of greenhouse gases have the potential to warm the planet to levels that have never been experienced in the history of human civilization. Such climate change could have far-reaching and or unpredictable environmental, social and economic consequences. Global impact of climate change: water temperatures over time are changing weather patterns. Warmer temperatures over time are changing weather patterns and disrupting the usual balance of nature. This poses many risks to human beings and all other forms of life on Earth. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) was set up by the World Meteorological Organization (WMO) and United Nations Environment Programme (UNEP) to provide an objective source of scientific information on climate change. In 2013, the IPCC provided a globally peer-reviewed report about the role of human activities in climate change when it released its 5th assessment report. The report was categorical in its conclusion: climate change is real and human activities, largely the release of polluting gases from burning fossil fuel, coal, oil, gas, is the main cause. According to the summary of UNEP as well as IPCC's annual assessment report, the global impacts of climate change is discussed below. The danger posed by war to all of humanity and to our planet is at least matched by the climate crisis and global warming. I believe that the world has reached a critical stage in its efforts to exercise responsible environmental stewardship. Ban Ki-moon, former General Secretary of the United Nations. Drought and global food scarcity. Climate change flowchart: natural biological emissions and man-made carbon emissions from fossil fuels. Influx of greenhouse gases. Greenhouse effect, global warming, climate change, ecological shift that affect us socially, financially, economically, agriculturally and environmentally. How climate change could impact the world: warmer water and flooding will increase exposure to diseases in drinking and recreational water. 250,000 deaths from disease by 2030, mainly due to malaria, malnutrition, diarrhea and heat stress. Vector-borne diseases like malaria and dengue virus will increase with more humidity and heat. Source: World Health Organization. Pollution and pollen season will increase, leading to more allergies and asthma. 7 million deaths from air pollution. 2 to 4 billion $4 billion cost by 2030. Hunger and famine will increase as food production is destabilized by drought. 4 degrees Celsius temperature rise, disrupting precipitation patterns and the frequency and intensity of some extreme weather events. Precipitation অর্থাৎ হচ্ছে বারিপাত অথবা আকাশ থেকে বৃষ্টি স্নো যেটাই পড়ুক না কেন সেটাই হচ্ছে precipitation. Disrupting precipitation patterns and the frequency and intensity of some extreme weather events. Social and economic impact of climate change. The cost of adapting coastal areas to rising sea levels. Loss of the capacity to work due to heat. More wires to gain access to limited resources. Fresh water will be in short supply in some areas. Relocation of whole towns. Shrinking productivity of harvest. Price of basic foodstuffs and consumer goods will rise. Diseases will spread due to higher temperatures. Extreme meteorological phenomena will cause widespread poverty. WMO, World Meteorological Organization, climate risk, extreme events and related impact. Okay. So, extreme weather events. Abnormally hot days and nights along with heat waves are likely to become more common. Species extinction. 1/3 or more of all species are on the being threatened with extinction. According to a BBC report, climate change could drive 1 million of the world species to extinction by 2050. Billions of people, especially in the developing world, will suffer too as they rely on nature for such essential goods and services as food, shelter and medicines. Dr. Klaus Teufer, the head of the United Nations Environmental Program. Sea level rise. As global temperatures increase, the oceans are a major concern. Melting ice and the addition of fresh water to the oceans around the world could change the stability of ocean systems and raise sea levels to a dangerous levels. Climate refuges. With over 80% of the world's population located in coastal regions around the world, the effects of climate change and the global sea level rise will create hundreds of millions of environmental refugees that must seek shelter further inland. Outbreak of infectious diseases. The health effects of climate change include respiratory and heart diseases, pest-related diseases like Lyme disease and West Nile virus, water and food-related illness and injuries and deaths. Climate change has also been linked to increases in violent crime and overall poor mental health. Impacts of climate change in Bangladesh. Bangladesh's strong growth could be at risk without urgent climate action. World Bank. Climate risks for Bangladesh are as follows. Environmental impact and socio-economic resources and sectors affected. Changes in rainfall patterns, increased frequency and severity of floods, droughts, storms, heat waves. Changes in growing seasons and regions. Changes in water quality and quantity. Sea level rise, glacial melt, water resources, agriculture and forestry, food security, human health, infrastructure, example হচ্ছে transport, settlements, displacement of inhabitants and loss of livelihood, coastal management, industry and energy, disaster response and recovery plans. Major environmental impact. Bangladesh has been facing the catastrophic effect of climate change for years. Decades of increasingly more severe storms, catastrophic flooding and relentless land erosion is causing this already small nation to disappear. Economic losses. What will be the cost of climate change impacts on Bangladesh? The poor and vulnerable people will be hardest hit. Over 13 million could become internal climate migrants. By 2050, a third of agricultural GDP is expected to be lost. Average tropical cyclones alone cost about $1 billion per annum. Average tropical cyclones alone cost about $1 billion per annum. Air pollution costs about 9% of GDP annually. Source: the Business Standard. Bangladesh's losses in 185 extreme weather events over the past 2 decades. Fatalities 572. Fatalities per lakh inhabitants 0.38. Losses in PPP. Losses per unit of GDP. Source: German Math. Sea level rise. According to UN, water at the center of the climate crisis. Water and climate change are inextricably linked. Climate change affects the world's water in complex ways, from unpredictable rainfall patterns to shrinking ice sheets, rising sea levels, floods and droughts. Most impact of climate change come down to water. Water-related disasters have dominated the list of disasters. Water-related disasters have dominated the list of disasters over the past 50 years and account for 70% of all deaths related to natural disasters, reports by World Bank. Bangladesh is experiencing a faster sea level rise than the global average of 3.42 mm a year, which will impact food production and livelihoods even more than previously thought. Government studies have found, due to the present rates of local sea level rise, more than 1 million people may be displaced. Found the study titled Estimation of Sea Level Rise (SLR) in Bangladesh using satellite accurate altimetry data conducted by the Department of Environment. Dhaka, Chittagong, very heavily populated areas. These are the very heavily populated areas. Actual sea level plus 1 meter. Bay of Bengal flooded. 15 million people affected. 15 million people affected. 17,000 kilometer square of land submerged. If it is not 1 meter, rather 1.5 meter, 18 million people affected. 18 million people affected. 22,000 kilometer square of land submerged. Source Dhaka University Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change PCC. Source IPCC. Flooding to affect Bagerhat, Barguna, Borishal, Vola, Chandpur, Chattogram, Cox's Bazar, Feni, Gopalganj, Jashore, Jalagathi, Khulna, Laxmipur, Narail, Noakhali, Patuakhali, Pirojpur, Shakira, Shariatpur. Jalagathi, Pirojpur, Borishal likely to be inundated the most. Up to 17.95 pc areas of the coastal zone may be flooded by the year. 17% areas of the coastal zone may be flooded by the year. Wallah. Over 10 lakh people can be displaced. Increase of climate migrants. It has been estimated that by 2050, 1 in every 7 people in Bangladesh will be displaced by climate change. Some scientists project a 5 to 6 foot sea level rise by 2100, which would displace perhaps 50 million people. Increased flooding. Sea level rise will directly result in increased coastal flooding, which is also associated with increased riverine flooding. Increased intensity of cyclones. The annual number spikes during years with powerful cyclones such as the following. In 2007, Cyclone Cedar claiming about 3,500 lives. In 2009, Cyclone Aila affected millions of people, claimed the lives of about 190 and left about 2 lakh homeless. In 2016, Cyclone Roanu disastrous landslides and submerged villages, leaving thousands homeless, forcing 500,000 people to evacuate and causing 26 fatalities. In 2009, Cyclone Bulbul forcing over 2 million people into cyclone shelter. In 2020, Cyclone Amphan took the lives of 10 people in Bangladesh and 70 others in India, left thousands homeless and destroyed at least 170,000 hectares of agricultural land in 17 coastal districts. In 2021, Cyclone Yash made landfall. In 23 October 2022, Chitrang, at least 29 people died in 11 districts made landfall. 14 May 2023, cyclonic storm Mocha. The cyclone had affected approximately 2.3 million people, destroyed over 2,000 houses and damaged more than 10,000 houses in Chattogram division. From the above examples, it is clear that stronger cyclones are becoming more common because of our changing climate. Increased salinity. According to Bangladesh's Soil Resources Development Institute, overall salinity in the country's soil has increased by about 26% over the past 35 years. Increased droughts. Climate change will exacerbate drought in Bangladesh both in terms of intensity and frequency. Monsoon rains produce 80% of Bangladesh's annual precipitation, and when this is reduced, drought is a significant problem. Greater temperature extremes. Over the past 44 years, the average temperature in Bangladesh has risen by 0.5 degrees Celsius or 0.9 degree Fahrenheit. The World Bank said in its climate afflictions report by 2050 that average will rise by 1.4 degrees Celsius, 2.5 degree Fahrenheit by 2015. Bangladesh is expected to experience an increase in temperature of about 1.5 degrees Celsius. Sectorial impact. Agriculture and fisheries. In Bangladesh, the overall impact of climate change on agricultural production will be negative. A study noted that a 4 degrees Celsius increase in temperature would have a severe impact on food production in Bangladesh. Health impact. Heat-related illness, cardiovascular disease, stroke and other chronic conditions, injuries and death, mental and neurological disorders, zoonotic vector and waterborne diseases, respiratory diseases and asthma. So resulting in a 28% reduction for rice and 68% reduction for wheat. There are 260 species of fish in Bangladesh, all of which are sensitive to particular salt and freshwater conditions, forestry or biodiversity. Climate change will have a detrimental effect on all of the forest ecosystems in Bangladesh, and the Sundarbans are likely to be the worst affected. Human health. Migration into urban areas. Over the last decade, on average, nearly 7 lakh Bangladeshis were displaced each year by natural disasters, according to Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. Climate change and security issue. Food crisis, water security, water scarcity, loss of property and life, land degradation and loss of of livelihoods, insecurity of women and children, displacement, social insecurity imposed by climate change. Figure: security issues threatened by climate change, climate injustice, we are sufferers of, not contributors to climate change. As a country, Bangladesh emits only a tiny fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions causing climate change. Bangladesh produces 0.56 tons of carbon dioxide per capita, whereas the United States produce 15.52 tons and China produces 7.38 tons. Cases like these are one of the main reasons developing countries are calling for the developed world to fund their energy transition efforts. Top carbon emitter countries are as follows. Carbon dioxide emissions by country: South Africa 1%, Australia 1%, Indonesia 2%, China 28%, India 7%, Japan 3%, South Korea 2%, Saudi Arabia 2%, Iran 2%, Turkey 1%, Russia 5%, Poland 1%, Italy, United Kingdom, France, Germany 2%, Brazil, Mexico, Canada 2%, United States 15%, China 28%, and rest of the world 21%. Billiontrees.com. Carbon dioxide emissions by country. Carbon ecological footprint calculator, July 23. Bangladesh's roadmap to climate action. We can temporarily protect ourselves through adaptation, but the adaptation process will fail to provide sustainable protection unless the current trend of climate change is restricted. As the president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, Prime Minister is the president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Bangladesh wants to set an example of how a developing country can conduct effective adaptation and mitigation actions against the effect of climate change. Initiatives and achievements: Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan up to 2030, Ashrayan, Shelter for the Homeless and Landless, Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. Besides, following initiatives have been taken: Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, BCCAP 2009, Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, BCCSAP 2009, National Solar Energy Roadmap 21 to 2041, National Action Plan for Clean Cooking 2022-2030, Forest and Carbon Inventories and Tree Plantation, Bangladesh National Action Plan, Bangladesh National Action Plan for Reducing Short-Lived Climate Pollutants, NAP-SLCP, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Master Plan up to 2030, Renewable Energy Initiatives, promoting green technology, international initiatives to combat climate change. Some of the initiatives are: initiative output, Earth Summit 1992 addressed following issues. Earth Summit 1992, systematic scrutiny of patterns of production, particularly the production of toxic components. 2. Alternative sources of energy to replace fossil fuels, reducing vehicle emissions, growing usage and limited supply of water, importance of protecting world's oceans. Kyoto Protocol 1997, fixed targets to reduce carbon dioxide and GHG emissions by about 5% compared with the levels measured in 1990. Kyoto Protocol 1997, fixed targets to reduce carbon dioxide and GHG emissions by about 5% compared with the levels measured in 1990. Paris Agreement 2015 sets an aim to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius compared with the levels measured before industrial activity became common around the world. Once again, Paris Agreement 2015 sets an aim to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius compared with the levels measured before industrial activity became common around the world. Okay. 2. Offers a framework under which more developed countries can provide financial and technological support for countries with fewer resources and at a less developed stage of their economies. The International Carbon Action Partnership, ICAP, International Carbon Action Partnership, sets a goal to limit emissions of greenhouse gases by instituting a policy that allows industry to exchange carbon credits effectively in the international marketplace. What did it say? Should read again. The International Carbon Action Partnership, ICAP, Carbon Action Partnership, sets a goal to limit emissions of greenhouse gases by instituting a policy that allows industry to exchange carbon credits effectively in the international marketplace. মার্কেটপ্লেসে কার্বন ক্রেডিট ইফেক্টিভলি এক্সচেঞ্জ করবে, ইফেক্টিভলি ভাবে এক্সচেঞ্জ করবে, ইন্টারন্যাশনাল মার্কেটপ্লেসে কার্বন ক্রেডিট এক্সচেঞ্জ করবে, এটার জন্য একটা পলিসি সেট করবে, ইনস্টিটিউট করবে একটা পলিসি এবং একটা গোল সেট করবে টু লিমিট এমিশনস অফ কার্বন গ্রিনহাউস গ্যাস লিমিট করার জন্য বাই ইনস্টিটিউটিং এ পলিসি, একটা পলিসি করবে দ্যাট অ্যালাউজ, যেটা আর কি অ্যালাউ করবে ইন্ডাস্ট্রি টু এক্সচেঞ্জ কার্বন ক্রেডিট ইফেক্টিভলি কার্বন ক্রেডিট এক্সচেঞ্জ করবে ইন দ্য ইন্টারন্যাশনাল মার্কেটপ্লেসের মধ্যে, নট ফেসবুক ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কার্বন অ্যাকশন পার্টনারশিপ, আইক্যাপ। সো নেক্সট কপ, আমাদের পরিচিত কপ 26 2021 reaffirms the Paris Agreement temperature goal of holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So এই যে প্যারিস এগ্রিমেন্ট 2015 এটাই আর কি রিঅ্যাফার্ম করছে COP 26 2021 এ। প্যারিস এগ্রিমেন্ট 2015 কি বলেছিল, sets an aim to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius compared with the levels measured before industrial activity became common around the world. And 2 নম্বরে বলেছিল offers a framework under which more developed countries can provide financial and technological support for countries with fewer resources and at a less developed stage of their economies. So COP26 2021 এ বললো রিঅ্যাফার্ম করলো এই প্যারিস এগ্রিমেন্ট টেম্পারেচার গোল of holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and pursuing effect to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. COP27 2022. COP27 is the yearly meeting of the group of 198 countries that have signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the world's first opportunity in the era of implementation of the Paris Agreement to demonstrate progress. Simon Steele, Chief of UN Climate Change. According to BBC, COP27 will be the most focused on reducing emissions, adaptation to and preparation for the effects of climate change, and providing access to technology and funds to nations that will be most affected by those changes. So COP27 is the yearly meeting of the group of 198 countries that have signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is the COP27 is the yearly meeting of the group of 190 countries that have signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. তো এই সিমন বলেছে চিফ অফ ইউএন ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জের সিমন বলেছে যে the world's first opportunity in the era of implementation of the Paris Agreement to demonstrate progress. Okay, according to BBC, COP27 will be the most focus on reducing emission. According to the BBC, COP27 will be the most focus on reducing emissions, adaptation to and preparation for the effects of climate change, and providing access to technology and funds to nations that will be most affected by those changes. COP28 2023, the 28th session of the Conference of the Parties, COP28, to the UNFCCC from the 30 November to 12 December 2013. So climate change adaptation, UNFCCC, Sustainable Development Goal 2030 Agenda, Disaster Risk Reduction, Sendai Framework, Disaster Risk Reduction, এই তিনটা একসাথে যোগ হয়েছে Reducing Vulnerability and Enhancing Resilience প্রকল্প। ওকে, ভালো লাগছে শব্দটা, যে ছবির মধ্যে Reducing Vulnerability and Enhancing Resilience, এই তিনটা যখন কমন হয়েছে তখন আমরা এটাকে বলতেছি যে রিডিউসিং ভালনারেবিলিটি অ্যান্ড এনহ্যান্সিং রেজিলিয়েন্স। কি তিনটা একসাথে হয়েছে, যে ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ অ্যাডাপ্টেশন, ইউএনএফসিসির ইউনাইটেড নেশন ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক কনভেনশন অন ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ, এটা হচ্ছে ইউএনএফসিসি। এটার ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ অ্যাডাপ্টেশনের সাথে হচ্ছে সাস্টেনেবল ডেভেলপমেন্ট গোলস, যেটা এসডিজি 2030 যে এজেন্ডা সেটা, এবং ডিজাস্টার রিস্ক রিডাকশন যেটা সেন্দাই ফ্রেমওয়ার্কে আছে, তিনটা যখন একসাথে হয়েছে সেটাকে এখানে বলা হচ্ছে যে রিডিউসিং ভালনারেবিলিটি অ্যান্ড এনহ্যান্সিং রেজিলিয়েন্স। ওকে, এই জিনিসটা আমাদের দরকার জীবনেও, যে ভালনারেবিলিটি রিডিউস করা এবং রেজিলিয়েন্স এনহ্যান্স করা জীবনে দরকার। Key outcomes of COP. The United Nations Climate Change Conference are yearly conferences held in the framework of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. They serve as the formal meeting of the UNFCCC parties, the Conference of the Parties COP, to assess progress in dealing with climate change, and beginning in the mid-1990s to negotiate the Kyoto Protocol to establish legally binding obligations for developed countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. What are the key outcomes of latest COP28 to combat the climate change as well as to save the world? Global Stocktake GST is a periodic review mechanism established under the Paris Agreement in 2015. The text proposes 80 steps to keep the global temperature rise within the ambit of 1.5 degrees Celsius. It calls for tripling renewable energy capacity globally and doubling the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. So এটা কি বলতেছে যে it calls for tripling renewable energy capacity globally and doubling global average annual rate of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency annual যে rate average annual rate সেটা ডাবল করতে হবে by 2030 এর মধ্যে। It calls for substantially reducing non-carbon dioxide emissions including in particular methane emissions globally by 2030. Transitioning away from fossil fuel, জীবাশ্ম জ্বালানি থেকে দূরে চলে যেতে হবে। COP28 calls for transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy system in a just, orderly and equitable manner, accelerating action in this critical decade to achieve net zero by 2050. Global Goal on Adaptation (GGA). Global Adaptation Goal focuses on enhancing adaptive capabilities and minimizing vulnerability for sustainable development. At COP28, this text calls for a doubling in adaptation finance and plans for assessment and monitoring of adaptation needs in the coming years. Positively, an explicit 2030 date has been integrated into the text for targets on water security, ecosystem restoration, and health. Climate finance. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development (UNCTAD) estimates that wealthy nations owe developing countries USD 500 billion in 2025 under the New Collective Quantified Goal (NCQG). New Collective Quantified Goal for Climate Finance. This the goal is to set a new collective quantified goal before 2025. Goal is to set a new collective quantified goal before 2025. The goal will start from a floor of USD 100 billion per year. This includes USD 250 billion for mitigation, USD 100 billion for adaptation, and USD 150 billion for loss and damage. Loss and damage fund. Member countries reached an agreement to operationalize the loss and damage (LND) fund aimed at compensating countries grappling with climate change impacts. Member countries reached an agreement to operationalize the loss and damage (LND) fund aimed at compensating countries grappling with climate change impact. A specific percentage is earmarked for least developed countries and small island developing states. The World Bank will oversee the loss and damage fund in the beginning. Global renewables and energy efficiency please মানে হচ্ছে কি serious promise. The please stipulates that signatories commit to work together to triple the world's installed renewable energy generation capacity to at least 11,000 gigawatt by 2030. It also calls for collectively double the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvements from around 2% to over 4% every year until 2030. The global cooling pleas for COP28. It includes 66 national government signatories committed to working together to reduce cooling related emissions across all sectors by at least 68% globally relative to 2020 levels by 2050. Declaration to triple nuclear energy. The declaration launched at COP28 aims to triple global nuclear energy capacity by 2050. We are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it. Barack Obama, former US President. While science tells us that climate change is irrefutable, it also tells us that it is not too late to stem the tide. This will require fundamental transformations in all aspects of society: how we grow food, use land, transport goods, and power our economies. At the end of the day, the global climate emergency must be taken seriously by every citizen of planet Earth. Actions need to be taken every single day if we want to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. সংযুক্তি 1-2. Shortly as a note, data collection idea, information box or some additional info for informative freehand writing. যে কোনো টপিকে আপনার একটা ইনফরমেশন বক্স থাকা উচিত যেন আপনি ওই টপিক সংশ্লিষ্ট কোর ও ক্রিম ইনফরমেশন জেনে বা সংগ্রহে রাখবেন। বাংলা ইংরেজি যে কোনো ভাষায় ব্যবহারযোগ্য এবং পরীক্ষায় ওই টপিক বা কাছাকাছি যে কোনো টপিকে রিলেট করে ইনফরমেশনগুলো আপনার লেখার ফাঁকে ফাঁকে জুড়ে দিয়ে আসতে হবে। মনে রাখতে হবে বিসিএস রিটেন কোথাও হুবহু লাইন বাই লাইন লেখা যায় না, কৌশলে লিখে আসতে হয়। ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ অ্যান্ড ইটস ইম্প্যাক্ট অন বাংলাদেশ এর কাছাকাছি গ্লোবাল ওয়ার্মিং অর কপ সামিট বিডি অ্যান্ড গ্লোবাল এনভায়রনমেন্ট সম্পর্কিত তথ্য বাংলা রচনায় ইংলিশে আছে, আন্তর্জাতিক বাংলাদেশের রচনামূলক প্রশ্নে যেন লিঙ্ক আপ করে আসতে পারেন। ইম্প্যাক্টস অফ ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ ইন বাংলাদেশ স্ট্রং গ্রোথ কুড বি অ্যাট রিস্ক উইদাউট আর্জেন্ট ক্লাইমেট অ্যাকশন। বাংলা ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংকের এই কথাটা আমরা দেখেছি এর আগেও। মেজর এনভায়রনমেন্টাল ইম্প্যাক্টস: ইকোনমিক লস, সি লেভেল রাইজ, increase of climate migrants, increased flooding, increased intensity of cyclones, increased salinity, increased droughts, greater temperature extremes, climate injustice. We are sufferers of, not contributors to climate change. Bangladesh's roadmap to climate action: we can temporarily protect ourselves through adaptation, but the adaptation process will fail to provide sustainable protection unless the current trend of climate change is restricted to Uday. Bangladesh wants to set an example of how a developing country can conduct effective adaptation and mitigation action against the effects of climate change. Initiatives and achievements. এটা একবার আমরা দেখছি, আবার দেখি। মুজিব ক্লাইমেট প্রসপারিটি প্ল্যান আপ টু 2030। সো আমরা এখানে এটা বলতে পারি যে ক্লাইমেট প্রসপারিটি প্ল্যান আপ টু 2030, ক্লাইমেট প্রসপারিটি প্ল্যান আপ টু 2030, আশ্রয়ন, শেল্টার ফর দ্য হোমলেস অ্যান্ড ল্যান্ডলেস, বাংলাদেশ ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ ট্রাস্ট ফান্ড, বাংলাদেশ ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ ট্রাস্ট ফান্ড, বাংলাদেশ ডেল্টা প্ল্যান 2100। Besides following initiatives have been taken: Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan (BCC-CCSAP) 2009, Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan CCSAP 2009, Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan CCSAP 2009, National Solar Energy Roadmap, National Solar Energy Roadmap 2021 to 2041, National Solar Energy Roadmap 2021 to 2041, National Solar Energy Roadmap 2021 to 2041, National Action Plan for Clean Cooking 2020 to 2030, National Action Plan for for Clean Cooking 2020 to 2030, National Action Plan for Clean Cooking, National Action Plan for Clean Cooking 2020 to 2030, Forest and Carbon Inventories and Tree Plantation, Forest and Carbon Inventories and Tree Plantation, Forest and Carbon Inventories, Forest and Carbon Inventories and Tree Plantation, Bangladesh National Action Plan for Reducing Short-Lived Climate Pollutants, NAP-SLCP, Bangladesh National Action Plan, National Action Plan for Clean Cooking, National Solar Energy Roadmap, Climate Change Strategies in Action Plan, National Action Plan for Reducing Short-Lived Climate Pollutants, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Master Plan up to 2030, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Master Plan up to 2030, Energy Efficiency এবং Conservation Master Plan up to 2030, Renewable Energy Initiatives, Promoting Green Technology। তারপর হচ্ছে COP28 নয় পরিবেশ বিষয়ক যে কোনো লেখায় ক্রিম ইনফো করতে হবে। Work together or face collective suicide, UN Chief at COP Summit। UN Chief COP Summit বলছে যে work together or face collective suicide, কত বড় একটা কথা। COP28 is the yearly meeting of the group of 198 countries that have signed UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The UNFCCC is a Rio Convention, one of two opened for signature at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. The COP28 UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, was the biggest of its kind. The first UN Climate Conference was held in Berlin, Germany in 1995. At the historic COP21 summit held in 2015, member states ratified the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was a groundbreaking agreement on what countries should do to combat the effects of climate change. The COP28 Climate Summit, the largest in history, concluded with a landmark but consensus agreement to transition away from fossil fuels endorsed by 198 nations. This historic agreement, known as the UAE Consensus, represents the first time in the 28-year history of UN climate summits that nations have collectively resolved to move away from the fossil fuels that are the heart of the climate crisis. The final agreement calls for a just, orderly and equitable transition. Key রকম transition? Just, orderly and equitable transition away from fossil fuels in energy system to achieve net zero by 2050 in keeping with the science. It was the most important achievement of COP28. The deal is historic, no doubt. The final text signals the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. Dr. Maria Neira, head of the Department of Climate, Environment and Health at the World Health Organization WHO, also the deal is historic, no doubt. The final text signals the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the summit's president, lauded the agreement as a historic triumph of unity, solidarity and collaboration. Delegates at COP28 also achieved a historic breakthrough by formally establishing a loss and damage fund which will provide financing for vulnerable countries hit hard by climate disasters. By the end of the COP28, the fund totaled US 770.6 million. The US pleased মানে কি করার সিরিয়াস প্রমিস করছে just US 17 million, while the UK and Canada were accused of simply replaced money that they had already committed. The role of AI, artificial intelligence, in climate action. COP28 also focused on technology development and transfer, particularly highlighting the role of artificial intelligence in climate action. The conference recognized the need for sustainable support, financial aid and capacity building for developing countries, establishing a technology implementation program to aid in this effort. Bangladesh has secured the Global Center on Adaptation GCA Locally Led Adaptation LLA Championship Award in the category of Innovation in Developing Finance during the ongoing climate conference COP28 in Dubai, UAE. Bangladesh has secured the Global Center on Adaptation GCA Locally Led Adaptation LLA Championship Award in the category of Innovation in Developing Finance during the ongoing climate conference COP28 in Dubai, UAE. Keywords from previous COP Summit. পরিবেশ বিষয়ক যে কোনো লেখায় কাজে লাগাবেন। The world's first opportunity in the era of implementation of the Paris Agreement to demonstrate progress. Simon বলেছিল, Chief of UN Climate Change. COP27 is the number one litmus test of how seriously governments take the growing climate toll on the most vulnerable countries. COP27 is a do or die moment for global action on climate change. The Earth is currently unable to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and after last year's natural events, this reality became more evident. Faced with a growing energy crisis, record greenhouse gas concentrations, and increasing extreme weather events, COP27 seeks renewed solidarity between countries to deliver on the landmark Paris Agreement for people and the planet. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The UN is urging the world's industrialized nations to lead by example by taking bold and immediate actions through a third of Pakistan flooded. Europe's hottest summer in in 500 years. The Philippines hammered. The whole of Cuba is blackout. And in the United States, Hurricane Ian has delivered a brutal reminder that no country and no economy is immune from the climate crisis. World Economic Forum, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. According to BBC, COP27 will be the most focused on reducing emissions, adaptation to and preparing for the effect of climate change, and providing access to technology and funds to nations that will be most affected by those changes. COP27 goals. As an all of Africa COP, the Egyptian COP27 presidency has defined the summit's four key goals are as mitigation, adaptation, finance, collaboration. Mitigation, adaptation, finance, and collaboration. Mitigation. All parties, especially those in a position to lead by example, are urged to take bold and immediate actions and to reduce emissions to limit global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. Adaptation. Ensure that COP27 makes the crucially needed progress towards enhancing climate change resilience and assisting the world's most vulnerable communities. Finance. Make significant progress on climate finance, including the delivery of the promised 100 billion per year to assist developing countries. Collaboration. As the UN negotiations are consensus based, reaching agreement will require inclusive and active participation from all stakeholders. We trust the world will come together yet again to reaffirm its commitment to the global climate agenda despite the difficulties and uncertainties of our time. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Loss and damage. The head of developing nations won a small victory when delegates agreed to put the controversial issue of compensation for loss and damage on the summit agenda. Guterres said COP27 must agree on a clear time-bound roadmap for loss and damage that delivers effective institutional arrangement for financing. Getting concrete results on loss and damage in a litmus test of the commitment of governments to the success of COP27, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Rich nations will also be expected to set a timetable for the delivery of 100 billion per year to help developing countries green their economies and build resilience against future climate change. This COP needs to demonstrate that there is a distinct shift from negotiations to implementation. UN Climate Change Executive Secretary Simon Stiel. Conversations about loss and damage. Loss and damage is the financial support for developing countries already being hit by climate-fueled disasters such as flood or crop withering drought. Very poor people are losing everything. We didn't demand charity, we demand justice. Vice for implementation at the UN Climate Agency UNFCCC. We can no longer plead ignorance to the consequences of our actions or continue to repeat our mistakes. US President Mr. Joe Biden. Mr. Biden announced in his speech the US would contribute $150 million as a down payment to initiatives to help Africa adapt to the changing climate. Bangladesh has been awarded the Local Adaptation Championship Award. Local Adaptation Championship Award at the COP27 Climate Summit in Egypt along with 3 other countries. The other 3 other countries to receive the award among 170 countries are India, Nepal and Kenya. Shortcomings of COP. Failure in strengthening emissions commitments, failure to tackle food insecurity, inadequate climate finance for developing countries, adaptation was given less priority. Humanity has a choice, cooperate or perish. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. 54টি দেশ দেউলিয়া হওয়ার পথে 3টি কারণে: মুদ্রাস্ফীতি বা ইনফ্লেশন, জ্বালানি সংকট, এনার্জি ক্রাইসিস, সুদ হার বৃদ্ধি, রাইজিং ইন্টারেস্ট রেটস। ইউএনডিপি প্রধান অ্যাচিম স্টেইনার কপ সামিটে আলোচনা চলাকালে বলেছে যে মুদ্রাস্ফীতি, জ্বালানি সংকট, সুদ হার বৃদ্ধি এই 3টি কারণে 54টি দেশ দেউলিয়া হওয়ার পথে। মুদ্রাস্ফীতি মানে ইনফ্লেশন, জ্বালানি সংকট, এনার্জি ক্রাইসিস এবং সুদ হার রাইজিং ইন্টারেস্ট রেটস। জাতিসংঘের সেই ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ দেশের তালিকায় পাকিস্তান থাকলেও বাংলাদেশ নাই। জাতিসংঘের মতে বৈশ্বিক জলবায়ু ঝুঁকিতে বাংলাদেশের অবস্থান সপ্তম হলেও সমুদ্রপৃষ্ঠের উচ্চতা বৃদ্ধিজনিত ঝুঁকিতে বাংলাদেশের অবস্থান প্রথম এবং কমপক্ষে 3 কোটি মানুষের বাস্তুচ্যুত হওয়ার সম্ভাবনা রয়েছে। বৈশ্বিক জলবায়ু ঝুঁকিতে বাংলাদেশের অবস্থান সপ্তম হলেও সমুদ্রের উচ্চতা বৃদ্ধিজনিত ঝুঁকি বাংলাদেশের অবস্থান প্রথম এবং কমপক্ষে 3 কোটি মানুষের বাস্তুচ্যুত হওয়ার সম্ভাবনা রয়েছে। টু ইমপ্লিমেন্ট দ্য ন্যাশনাল অ্যাডাপ্টেশন প্ল্যান প্রিপেয়ার্ড বাই দ্য বাংলাদেশ গভর্নমেন্ট উই নিড $230 billion till 2030. We hope that international organizations like the United Nations will help us execute the plan effectively. Environment, Forest, Climate Change Minister. Bangladesh wants climate finance doubled by 2025 to implement the National Adaptation Plan (NAP). National Adaptation Plan. Bangladesh wants climate finance doubled by 2025. Environment, Forest and Climate Minister. Jiaul Haq Mirza Shaukat Ali, climate expert and representative from Bangladesh to COP27 বাংলাদেশের কনফারেন্সে এর নাম কাজে লাগানো যেতে পারে। আচ্ছা, সুতরাং বিশ্বকে okay, we are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it. Barack Obama, former US President. Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to the adverse impacts of climate change. To stop global climate change and reduce disaster risk, we need to truly implement Agenda 2030. The Paris Agreement and the the Sendai framework. The world urgently needs to find more resources for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage so that climate change will not erode humanity's chances to deliver on the sustainable development goals. ওকে, সো তাহলে আমাদের হচ্ছে যে ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ এবং এটার যে ইম্প্যাক্ট ছিল সেটা হচ্ছে শেষ হলো আর কি। তো তারপরে যে ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ অ্যান্ড ইম্প্যাক্ট শেষ, তারপর আমাদের এই যে এগুলো নিয়ে আমাদের একটু মাথা ঘামাতে হবে। তো এই ভিডিওতে এখানে বিদায়, দেখা হবে নেক্সট কোনো ভিডিওতে।